you very much for that welcome, and thank you to everybody for coming along on a Saturday morning. I know what we do for the love of maths. So as you know, my name is Seonaid Cooke, and my partner in crime today is Julie Brewer, and she will welcome herself a little bit later. I am not an astronaut, or even although this picture looks like I definitely am. And Julie, as you can see, is the glamorous one of the two. We've come this morning to speak to you about counting collections, and our aims are really quite simple. We have found that this activity is something that engages lots of children, and we want to explore with you how it works and what it is. We're going to share examples of children's work and how their thinking can be extended. And we're going to have some reflections from teachers, pupils and families, because it's okay us standing here, sitting here, telling you that this is something that we're really passionate about and that we believe in, but it's really worthwhile that we share with you what other people have said and how they have got on with this activity in their classes. There's huge opportunities to embed numeracy, maths and skills throughout this session. So first of all, I'd like to ask you a question about how often you have given more than 100 objects to the children in your class to count. I'm sorry, my slide kept moving there, I don't know why. So just pop into the chat. Do you give children in your classes more than 100 loose objects? Please be honest, and we'll just, if you could just tell me roughly, Iona, how many, or Jacqueline, lots of people saying yeses or nos.
We've got rarely, never, 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 rarely, never, never, rarely more than 100. That's about a snapshot.
Okay, thank you very much. And that is exactly what we have when we speak to other teachers that we've been working with this year.
We have one yes. We have one yes.
Oh, yay. Maybe somebody that's tried counting collections. Never. It would be too messy. That was me. Occasionally, but not on a regular basis. So what happens with counting collections is that you do give children the opportunity to be in control of their learning. They have these loose collections. And I can remember my very first lesson watching these children organising these loose materials, and I was terrified because it really opened my eyes to what they actually understood. I'd made so many assumptions about their understanding. So counting, as we know, involves pattern, structure, quantity and number sense. But it can also be extended to involve grouping, multiplicative reasoning, fractions and decimals, and that's what we really want to share with you this morning. So a lot of what we're talking about today has come from a book called Choral Counting and Counting Collections. It's a fabulous book and shares lots of classroom materials that children have worked with and teachers have worked on. We're not even going to manage to touch on choral counting today, but that is another passion that we have found children are really responding to and teachers are enjoying exploring in their classrooms. So when we introduce counting collections, it has multiple entry points. So children at any stage can be involved in this activity. So we can have children who are starting to count in ones and really organising that collection. We've got children that are grouping, maybe in tens or in other quantities. And we can also have children who are working with decimals. So your whole class can be involved in counting collections, and the differentiation is in what they do with the collection. So why introduce it? If you ask the children, they'll tell you it's fun maths. That's a pretty good recommendation, I think. They do really like it. The teachers we've been working with and the children enjoy the routines. They feel confident with what they're doing, and it really provides these opportunities for them to explore. They get the chance to articulate their ideas, and that session this morning from the lead speaker, she was talking about more children talking and less teacher talk. And I think this is something that is really apparent when you introduce counting collections, because you step back. They explore strategies in a way that makes sense to them. And it's a routine that we have found can be explored at all levels, and Julie will really go into that with you later on. Moving into second level, we have found that children are making discoveries for themselves and feeling confident to explore. So feedback from teachers that we've been working with just this year, and remember, this year has been probably one of the hardest ever for teachers, whether you've loads and loads of experience or whether you are very new to teaching. It's felt completely different. So a composite teacher here with primary 1 to 4 children saying it's early days, but it's something she wants to continue to embed. The kids love it, and so do I, so we're on to a winner. Primary 4 teacher taught me so much more about the children in my class than I would learn from paper and pencil activities. Primary 7 teacher, child comes into school every day when they're in saying, can we do counting collections? Because he wants to extend his thinking. He wants to explore things further for himself. And they're also learning these other skills, these life skills, as they collaborate. Primary 5 teacher, they've really developed their team working skills and problem solving skills. She started to give them bigger collections, and they had to really work together to solve the problem. So what do you need? Not a lot, really. Most classrooms have got lots of loose objects. You can start to gather materials as you go along the way, but anything that can be counted. So loose parts that you have, games with bits missing, bottle tops, start gathering them and you can pop them into bags. You can offer the children tools as well, so like of your tens frames, pots, paper plates, anything that they can start to group things in. So really, you don't need a huge amount, and you probably have quite a bit of it already. So how does it work? The children are encouraged to work with a partner. This might not always work for some children in your class, but you know who they are, and you will be able to pair them up so that they can work effectively together. But this also means you don't have to have children working at the same levels together. And we found that this has really helped children have conversations with other children. They choose a collection that they would like to count. They plan how they will count it. They collect tools of their choice. You do not tell them what they are going to do. Hard bit. They count the collection. So that is the task. They have this bag of items and they need to count them. And then they can record what they've done. Sounds really simple, doesn't it? And I remember that very first time doing that lesson in my class. I had children that were really confident with numbers, or so I thought. I gave them a bag of dinosaurs. There were about 70 dinosaurs in the bag, and they had no idea how to organise it or how to count them. And these were pupils that I had assumed really knew what they were doing. And the child then said to me, I've got about 30, I think. And then in that pile over there, I think there's 40. And I said, well, we need to find out how many there are. And she turned to me and said, what? You want me to count them all over again? I said, well, the task was to find out how many we had. So she started to really think about how she was going to do that. And that was, for me, was a huge learning curve. So as adults, we can observe them. And this is what the teachers are telling us. It's a lovely way to get around your whole class, see how they're collaborating, see how they're making sense. We listen to what they say. We can assess them with what they're actually doing at that moment in time. We can interact, we can encourage them to think and support them to move on, and ask them ways to think about their collection. How else could they organise it? But what we must do as teachers is refrain from telling them what or how to do it. We want them to do the thinking. So children leading their learning can feel a little bit like a fish out of water sometimes for people like me who would rather be showing them what to do and really making sure that they were going to be successful. And here's a reflection from a teacher I've been working with this year. And I knew when I introduced this to him, he was like, I don't really know what to do. So when he first started doing it, he felt quite insecure. He thought they were just playing. But in the year of trying this, he said, I have started to notice so much more. The children are exploring strategies, and it's really breaking down barriers about maths anxiety. There was children in the class who would not be happy if they saw that maths was on the timetable for that day. And he could tell by their facial expressions that they weren't looking forward to it. There's this increased confidence. He's got children working at different levels, having conversations about the same maths, but at their own understanding and sharing their knowledge with each other. Everybody's included. And they're not afraid to try new things. And we talk about mistakes being something we should celebrate, but lots of children feel embarrassed when they make mistakes. I feel embarrassed because I probably will make mistakes this morning and be mortified that it's recorded. So making mistakes is a hard thing. And for children to have those loose parts in front of them and be able to reorganize them and talk about their thinking is really helping their understanding. So we notice, we observe, we encourage. Tell me about the collection that you have. Lots of children start to organise things in colours when they first get them. Different objects might be organised in different ways depending on what you give them. So we know that counting is vital, and it's that strong foundation we want all of our learners to have. But a lot of children don't actually know why we count. They don't understand the purpose behind it. So then we started asking the children what they think about counting collections. Gets my brain working, and it's always fun. It's good working with a partner. Feels much safer. Julie and I feel safer today because we're presenting together. You know, you do something on your own, it's harder. Exploring different ways of counting, I can be faster and knowing why. I like to organise things in colours. I want to do counting collections every day. I like counting the Lego. And the lesson is so fast. You know, when you have that lesson and you feel so delighted because the children can't believe how quickly it went. They were so engaged in what they were doing. So observations, as we know as teachers, are key. We can watch what they do. We can see how they organise. We can ask them to tell us about their count. And all the time you're getting that constant feedback from the pupils, and it's that understanding of where they are in their development. So we've got assessment going on as we're teaching, and they are learning together. So we can notice, you know, show me how you counted these bears. We can check that one-to-one correspondence. We might have noticed that they have taken tools, they've organised them in fives, but we can't make the assumption that they can count in fives. They may still count them in ones. We're listening for that number word sequence. And again, after they've counted, we're checking that cardinality. So how many bears did you count? We've got that opportunity to talk about odd and even numbers with whatever they've counted. How do they know? They're revisiting these concepts that are really important. They get to explore different ways. It really is up to them. We don't say we want everybody to count in fives. They're given that collection and they decide how they're going to organise it. They choose. And this way, they're exploring and doing it for themselves and understanding that it is more efficient to count in larger groups. You know, counting in tens is quicker, but they come to that reasoning themselves. They can be creative with their collections. We're not going to tell them that they have to group it in tens. We're not saying it has to be in 20s. You know, this group here, we're counting with the the coloured domino thing, tiles, and said that this red one couldn't go in with the greens because it didn't fit the rule of being green. These children have grouped by colour, and here they've decided to group in eights and then shown us their thinking. Counting doesn't have to be in a line, so it's up to children how they go about this and talking about what's effective for them. We need open-mindedness. We talk about creativity in maths, but for many children, they think maths is about putting a number in a box because that's where the answer goes. Are they curious? How do we keep that going? We talk about curiosity in the early years and we really embrace that. And then for some children, they have this sort of shutter comes down and maths becomes tricky and then they switch off. But we've got to keep that reignite. We can reignite that, keep their imagination going and really encourage that problem solving, that being stuck and thinking. And these are more reflections that teachers, you know, a primary 7 teacher has found that it's really adaptable in her class. She's got children working at all levels, but she's found that it's a really lovely way for her to have everyone engaging in the same activity and them learning together. Realising the ambition, it's a year old just now, really helping us to think about playful learning and how children engage. There was a recent article that was written and linked to the hubs that are the work being done in England, where counting collections were introduced to early years settings and to reception classes. And what the staff were finding was there was this real joy for counting. The children had free access to the collections. Sometimes they just played with them. Sometimes they created patterns and they were practicing counting. For some children, they would have a favourite collection, just the same as we have a favourite book, and we like to revisit it and revisit it. Children love doing things again and again. It makes them feel safe, it makes them feel secure, but they will explore it in different ways. There was increased opportunities for counting and staff enjoyment. This image here was one when Julie had gone to a class and the children had had access to materials but hadn't really explored it until counting collections was happening in another part of the classroom. And then they went back to the tough tray and started to play around with the tens frames and placing the pasta pieces into each of the spaces. Chatting, talking about what they were doing, and a real excitement. Children have the opportunity to explore the tools in a way that they want to, in a way that makes sense to them. They're encouraged to think about their recording. Here we've got children counting marbles, gems, and recording that number word sequence to show how many they have. On the right-hand side, we've got a pupil really exploring the frames. And you can see those Hungarian tens frames, which are one of my favourite tools to use. But they've decided to put 2 into each of the spaces and counting collections in 20s. There are no rules. Making sense of place value. Do we give our children opportunities to actually see what this quantity looks like? So here we've got children counting lids on tens, on the Hungarian tens frames, and on the right, a child who was really excited about being able to count this quantity and had put all of the Numicon pieces onto the tens frames. And as he counted aloud, it became clear that he could count to 100, but he didn't know what to do with the tens frame. You can just see it under his knee, going beyond that boundary of 100. He kind of stopped and was unsure. When we have them going 100, 200, and they pause, but having the materials there in front of him, he could see that that wasn't the same as 100. The quantity looked different. He's able to make more sense of it. Listening to their thinking. Here's children recording in different ways. So thinking that there might be 200 in the collection, having to count, so starting to count in tens and then counting in ones because they placed some of the pasta onto a fives frame, so having to switch their count. And then talking about the groups that are on the floor. No, there isn't 8 tens. These fives can go together and that makes a 10. There are 9 tens and 5. Opportunities for estimation. I don't know what you all think. I'm a personal lover of not liking the page in the workbook or on the worksheet that says estimate how many bears, and then underneath it says now count to check. I know what I would do if I was a child. I would just count and put the same answer in each box. So estimating is something that we do every day in our adult lives, and giving children those opportunities to estimate for a purpose is really important, and that's something that can be really introduced well with counting collections. Looking at the bag, deciding what the estimate will be and why you're estimating that number. It can also be extended when children become familiar with the activity, and here the teacher has given them the opportunity to explore ranges. And they've also had the chance to estimate at the start of the session, and then she's paused the lesson partway through while they were counting and asked them if they want to make a revised estimation, something that we all do in our daily lives. Again, we also have that different opinions, different children having different ideas about the same thing. What a great way to get conversations started. How far away from your estimate was your answer? And then we're counting to check. It really brings it all together. Children are having lots of conversations and they're making sense of things like remainders. I was working with children in primary 4 and asked this little boy who wasn't that confident about numbers, how many 20s are there in 87? And quite quickly after having counted this, was able to say there are 1, 2, 3, 4 groups of 20 and 7 left over there. They're able to point to the containers to show where each of the 10s were and then show me that was 20. And to extend it, I then asked about 40s, thinking they might be quite hesitant, but I was told that that was easy. How silly of me to even ask the question. There's 40 here and 40 here and 7 left over. I love it when children surprise me and when they're excited about their maths. So what we're finding is we're having lots of connections with counting collections and confidence to explore. So a primary 4 child was working on a question about 26 pots of pencils, having 6 pencils in each pot. So how many altogether? And they had initially worked out 6 times 6, you can see that over here, and they've written each of the 6s and represented them as ones, but they have then put them in a group. They've then gone on to write 26 6 times. And it might look like it's really inefficient, but this child had just started to group in 20s with their counting collections and very confidently told the class that she circled this, that was a 20, and then she counted in 20s to get to 120, added on the 36 that she'd already worked out and got to 156. She was really, really confident about sharing her ideas and being able to explore 26 times 6. She felt like she was a real problem solver. We encourage the children to record their thinking at the early stages. It can look a little bit like this. And it can then be extended. Children might be encouraged to keep a track of what they're doing, scrap paper, post-it notes. If these are freely available to the children, they will use them. Or they might see somebody else doing it and think, do you know, next time I might try that. So they're sharing their ideas about learning all the time. So recording can start looking like this. The one on the right here, the child was asked how they had gone about counting and showed each of the steps. So they did it in ones, then they put them in groups of 10, then they put them in rows with 5, so it looks a bit like a tens frame, and then put them into the tubs. And we've got that more abstract representation of the 10. And that's what you'll start to see as they record. I'm just going to show you some of these examples. I'm very aware of time. There's so many opportunities to extend their thinking though. You know, how many more to 60? How many more to 100? How do you know? Starting to group the 20s to make 100. So what will you do next time? What were you really pleased about today? We know that families talk about not being confident with maths. And we know that in Scotland, we do talk about maths anxiety. And we know that engaging parents is a really powerful tool for supporting children's achievement in learning. So we need to be really aware of how we engage families and make them feel part of what the maths that's going on. And some of our schools have been encouraging children to count collections when they're at home. And you can see here's an image. I'm just going to do these quite quickly. I'm very aware of time. That, you know, we're getting really positive comments. Parents don't feel stressed by this type of activity and they're actually doing it with their child. So again, we've got that discussion going on and they're talking. You know, 310 toys. Mum couldn't believe it. Another teacher's asked families to find a collection of more than and given a number and then ask them to show how they've grouped them. And they're getting photographs sent in like this. It's a really positive way to explore numbers. She's also asking them then to record their thinking, and we've got all that discussion about multiplication tables going on at kitchen tables or on the floor, but during this period of lockdown. So I'm now going to hand over to my partner in crime, who's going to take it a little bit further and show you how we really love this for across the school. So I'm going to hand over to Julie and, oh, she's super fast, she's in there.
Hi everybody, can you hear me, Seonaid? Great. Okay, thanks Seonaid for that. Yes, my name is Julie Brewer, by the way. I am the glamorous one. I quite like the squinty eye and the patches on the trousers. I think that's quite a good representation. This idea of using counting collections to support a productive struggle for the children. I really think it's been so valuable to watch children persevere with these collections, trying to make sense of them. And it's a perfect way for them to see that there isn't only one way, and the flexibility in their thinking is encouraged and also really supported by their peers. So I'm going to take you through just what happened in one session in one of the maths lessons The picture on the left doesn't show the starting point for this collection. The children actually started putting their piles of stones into groups of 6. And when they came to count them, they could do 6 and 12, and then they started counting in ones. And as they were doing that, one of the girls, there's 2 of them working on this together, suggested that they could actually do 5s because she knew how to count up in 5s. So all of a sudden the count started to change. The grouping changed to 5s, and I really love the way that even the way that the children were putting out the groups of 5 was very different. And the conversation about how easy it was to see, was it as easy to see both groups of 5s? And that led to them noticing that they could go back and pick up some of these cups on the right hand side, the tools that Seonaid was talking about, and pop them into the cups, and that might help them be able to move them a little bit easier. When they put the cups there, I think this is the thing as a teacher, look at this kind of collection here, you sort of want to encourage them to pop them in a line because there was lots of over and under counting going on and they couldn't quite agree. Every time they had a total, the other person would check and it would be a different answer. So they came up with this idea of trying to be slightly more organized in the sort of lining up, and whilst they were doing that, they suddenly realized it's almost like it's kind of like a couple of light bulb moments. Why don't we put 2 cups together and make 10s? Now they've got 9 groups of 10 there with 1 5. And when we had this discussion, I was so thrilled with the thinking that these children aren't particularly confident in a P4 to 7 class. Gathered the children, the rest of the class round, and the conversations they had to explain why they had chosen to do it the way they had. They explained about counting in 6s being too hard and that they knew 2 5s made 10. And somebody noticed you would need 5 more and you've got 100. Somebody said if you did have those 10 cups of 10 stones, you'd have 100. And 100 take away 5 is 95. And then the last comment there on the right, you've got 4 groups of 20 as well, and you've got a 10 and a 5, and that makes 95. So just look at this inclusive conversation in a P4 to 7 class. And as Seonaid said, teachers are often teaching from early up to sort of 2nd level just in one session. This is another lovely example of a productive struggle. How many sides are there in all this bag of 2D shapes? And I just want to show you just a couple of ways where children are organising their counting, and not necessarily in the most efficient way, but in the way that makes sense to them. On the top slide there, you've got basically running totals. There's a lot of thinking going on, repeatedly adding the numbers together. The child that they were working with was just listing all the 4s. It's actually it's that pattern that's going on there, but with the numbers. And somebody else started drawing the shapes. So that's taken a lot of work to draw the shapes and write the number. And that discussion about you don't need to draw the shapes. You could just write that list of numbers that I have. And then her friend saying, hang on a minute, we could count up how many 4s. And I've got 11 times 4. Now, this was what was really lovely, was the girl that came up with the idea to group them together and use multiplication. She didn't have her multiplication facts instantly, but her friend did. So this is why this kind of, this idea of children working freely in a classroom and being able to use each other's strengths means that, if you had grouping in this classroom, those 2 girls would not be working together. The child on the right has actually used a tally, which actually, if you think about it, first of all, I was thinking, did I really give them 20 rectangles and 12 hexagons? And I realized that this wasn't a count of the number of the shapes. They had tallied the number of sides, but now they've still got quite a lot of work to do and to get all those subtotals together. So when we're talking about this idea of the counting collections for children that are in P4 to 7, I think it's really important. Seonaid asked you earlier on, how many times do you count beyond 100? Well, my question is, how many times do you give opportunities to count beyond 1,000? So a teacher that I worked with last year took a bag of rice in and asked the children, how many grains of rice do you think? Sadly, I can't get hold of the pictures of this, but you can imagine if the children were starting to count, they started to count in 10s. Then they took 10 groups of 10 and made a unit of 100. And that conversation about if we have 10 groups of 100, what have we got? They were recording this and they were trying to show how many thousands were in 10,000, how many 10,000s were in 100, and so on, until they could get, you know, what is a million? What does it actually really mean? And then there's a really lovely image there that you can imagine where the children are actually able to see how many ones are in a million, how many tens are in a million, and so on. So giving your children opportunities to be creative with very tiny amounts and collections is a good idea. This is another way to do it at a second level. If you want to increase the kind of flexibility of the counting collection, you can assign a different value to each unit. So if the counting collection today, each pebble was worth 1,000, when the children put 10 into one of these cups, you can see that they become, the cup is worth 10,000. And then we can see here that this row is become 50,000. And now you have got this conversation going on with how many groups of 50,000. And I was thinking, you know, about the questions that had been asked at the time. And the questions were very much related to kind of traditional place value questions. How many more would you need to get up to 150,000? How close are you? Are you closer to 100 or 200,000? But then I was actually thinking to do some really lovely work here on, you know, what if I had a problem and I had to take 80,000 away? You can see how the children might start thinking, I'm going to take the 80,000 away from that 100,000. That will leave me with 20,000 and I've still got my 49,000 safe. And just allowing children time to be able to be reflective using those materials will support their thinking later on. This is another picture here where each jigsaw piece was assigned the value of, let me get this right, 100. So then what you've got here is you've got a pile of 1,000. And again, using kind of a tens frame pattern, putting these into groups of 1,000s, and you can see they're recording here 5,000. They realized that actually somebody had put 6 groups here. So they had 6,000, and then there's 2 left over here. So there were some really eagle-eyed people thinking about like the mistake that they'd made, and rather than alter the pattern, they just made their recording reflect what they could see. And I love this kind of informal recording turning into a bit more formal recording, and even just this use of brackets. Now, the child that used this hasn't been taught brackets in the classroom, but they have been working at home with older brothers and sisters, and they told me that they had actually been listening to some of the lessons. But just look at that there, the collection of the numbers there and the understanding of what actually is in 16,300. And again, yesterday, the children that did this collection were putting 5 pieces of pasta into a pot, a little bit like the stones, and then the value was 1. So the photograph can be taken. It doesn't, because we've been working on lockdown, we've been trying to find creative ways to, you know, offer children counting collections. And this idea of giving them the value of 0.1, look at all the wonderful recording here of their thinking. 10 groups of 0.5 equals 5. And with a little bit of discussion, I realized that what they knew, the facts that they knew, was 10 lots of a half was 5. They know that 0.5 is the same as a half. So a lot of this work is really nice to hear their connections with the other work that we've been doing and to record. And this idea that they know that if you've got 9 groups of a half, then you're just taking a half away from 5. Another really lovely thing in the P4 class where this child was given a group of Dean's equipment to try and count, just like a random selection. And the light bulb moment when she realized, when she was stacking them all up and drawing, this is what she realized that got her excited. Actually, 30 groups of 10 makes 300. And she hadn't really thought about that before. And it was just that moment where, as teachers, you get the shiver down the back when you think, yes, this little girl is loving this lesson. The other thing that makes me laugh is when you do these things and you never really kind of can expect, you can't predict what you're going to get. And of course, what I asked that child to do was show me the value of his collection. So he wrote the 42 in blues, the 27 in red, and the 57 or the 51. So again, being really clear about what you're wanting the children to do, but is there anything wrong with that collection? And when he looks at what his friends did on the right-hand side, will the next session be different for him, or will he continue like that? I love the fact that this child has taken these different values. So the yellow is 1, the red is 2, the green is 5, and the blue is 10. And now they're thinking about what is the best way to organise that count. And you can see there that they've put 5 groups of 2. They've got 10s here, they've made groups of 10 here, they made groups of 10 here, and here they've got hundreds. And I was thinking, obviously, with my head thinking, right, well, they've got 80 here and they've got 20 here. I would have, you know, if that was my collection, I would have put those 2 together to make 100. Well, it didn't take me long. All I needed to do was ask, how did they know that they had their amount? And that's, you know, they will tell you. We didn't move the yellows because it was quite hard to kind of put them all together. But if you've got the blue piles, there's 400. The yellow and reds make another 100. The greens make, and I've forgotten what it was, 90, I think. And then we've got these leftovers. So don't presume that the children haven't done, you know, things that you would do, and just take time to listen to what they are describing. This is another one of my favorites. You can see the values that each colour of the unifix had been assigned, and then you can see the wonderful conversation. The children did not record this. I'm recording what they said to me. So one person said 0.2 add 0.3 add 0.1 add 0.4 equals 1. And he said, I just know because it's 2 and 3 is 5, add 1 is 6, add 4 is 10. And I said, so when you're describing it like 2 and 3 and 1 and 4, what is that 2 worth? And he said, 2/10. So, you know, he's using his knowledge of whole numbers and his number bonds to 10, and he's able to make those connections. This is really lovely. This one here, the 0.4 and the 0.1 makes 0.5. And I know 2 lots of 0.5, 2 halves makes 1. And then this idea of, so this is the same as this. And I mean, we know that children struggle with this equal sign and what, you know, what equals actually means. So actually being able to say that 2 halves is the same as that is really impressive. This picture here is very similar. The children use the values to create groups of 1. So giving children these problems to solve allows them to think creatively. They may not have done that. They might have ended up doing like the tally like the previous children did. You'll see there that the teacher from P7 is saying that they really found that these counting collections help the children's confidence. I agree, but I also feel that to be able to understand and be able to do this task, they need to have an understanding of what temps are. So this to me feels like good practice and allowing them to be flexible in their thinking. But I would make sure that I'd also done that work so the children had the really understood at a concrete stage and could explain what a temp was. Sometimes when they're doing this, I feel that things start to make more sense. This was one of my, I keep saying this, I do have a lot of favourite things, but this is another favourite. So I'm going to try and take you through the thinking, but please excuse me if it gets a bit muddled. Here we go. 0.2 for one orange unifix, 0.4 for brown. I didn't actually mean to give him the same amount of orange and browns, but I obviously hadn't thought that one through. So he's lined them up, he's got 12. He's worked out by counting in 2s that he has got the value of 24. So if he transfers that into decimals, he's got 2.4. And then he said, I just lined up the browns, and the browns are double the amount of orange. So these are worth 4.8. And he didn't actually total them, but another friend that was working with him said, well, the brown is 2 lots and this is 1 lot. And I just want to show you what he did with his thinking. So on the next slide, sorry, I leapt ahead there. This is what he actually said. Instead of doing 12 lots of 0.2 and 12 lots of 0.4, you can just do 3 lots of 0.2. So I'm just going to work out, I know what 12 times 0.2 is because that's the orange stick, that's 2.4. And then I'm just going to multiply that by 3. And really, without him realizing that he's using the associative property, this is what he's describing. And again, this is not his recording, this is my recording of the conversation I had with that child. And I just think if we give children these experiences like counting collections alongside things like story problems and choral counting, and lots of opportunities to explore number, then you're gonna end up with a really empowered group of children that love exploring maths. And this, I want to just finish my presentation with a few slides to show an online story problem project that we've been doing in a P1-2 class and a P3-5 class in a SAC school, where the children aren't very confident with number. So this feels like a very hard question. There's a range of questions given, started off with 3 snowmen and 6 buttons, doubled that to 6 snowmen just to see if they made any connections with those answers, and moved on to 7 snowmen. So that would have been 1 more group of 6 buttons. And this little girl has put out her collection. This line here is the 1 snowman. She can count in 2s, but up to a point. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and so on. And just listening to her, a friend can count up further. She is exploring different ways to count up in 2s and 1s. This other P1 and 2 child, I can't remember, I'm sorry if she was P1 or P2, but she's collected the number of buttons to help with this problem with 6 cars and 4 people. But when she came to the 7 cars and 4 people, obviously some of the children did use their information, their answer from this previous question. She redrew the cars, but this time she's starting to regroup. She's still counting in 1s, but she's thinking now about grouping in 2s. This lends itself it's easier to skip counting 2s than the one on the left. This next picture here is really lovely idea of just within like 6 sessions, the little girl has got her 3 snowmen with 6 buttons and she's counting in 1s. I asked the question, this is again, one of the last questions in the group, 72 fingers waving at Miss Brewer, how many hands can you see? Now this dot is not got a value of 1. She's unitized that dot, and now that dot has a value of 5. And she's using her skip count, she tells me, if I count up, and I think I've got 72 and I've just realized it should be 75. Well, there's always a mistake on every presentation I do, so there it is. Let's hope that's the last one. This is another lovely thing. Look at this, the counting collections, they were just exploring how 2 5s make 10. And when we come to doing the problem was 8 groups of 5, and the little girl had the 8 groups of 5 and then said, I don't need to do that, I can just make 4 groups of 10. So we can see that this is the little girl there at the very beginning of the session was using her count from 1, and then she's using a double 5 is 10 strategy. And I like to model those connections that the children are talking about, and when I'm modeling their thinking and recording what they're saying, they're beginning to see how they can kind of use this language to describe what they've done. The choral counting and looking at patterns supports their thinking and gets them to remember, not gets them to remember, but supports their thinking, but also helps them to think about using that in some of their story problems. This child here on the left, the problem was trying to share 45 into 7 groups, and actually what has happened is she made the 45 beautifully but just had no idea. Even though the problem was in a story and the story was reread, she really struggled. After a few sessions, she started to create her own groups. She started to think about, this is her drawing. Look at this, isn't it superb? She put 9 in each of these 4 here, but this one was empty. And she said, oh, that's 20. She actually didn't put 9 in each one because that would have been 36. But this is what she's recorded. I'm going to forgive her. She's, she's made a remarkable achievement here of then taking out a couple from each of here and popping them into this one. And so through lots of perseverance and productive struggle, she's ended up being able to solve quite a hard problem. These children here are using arrays and trying to record informally the use of array. The girl here has made the 5 groups, and then she is actually labeling how much she has, how many groups she has, and she can see that there's 9 in each pot. This is all children's kind of exploration and trying to make sense of the problem. And I wanted to end with this child because I want you to look at all of the thinking that has gone into this problem. 36 sweets, and I share them between 6 people, and I get the same amount, so there are none left. And you can see here the 6 counters represent the 6 children. So let's have a look at what she's done. This was modeling what she was doing so the other children could follow. So she said, I split 36 into thirds. So we were looking at this. If we had 6 pots, then if we put them into thirds, and she explained what that meant, and 2 pots is 1/3 of 36, and she's already split the 30 into 3 groups of 10 and the 6 into 3 groups of 2. And you can see here that 36 now becomes this 12 and 12 and 12. And she realized that if you split those thirds into half again, you'll get 6. You'll get 6 equal groups. And all this thinking just from one story problem. The next session, she went on to talk about, if I have to share 72, the biggest amount I know is 10 times 6, and that gives me 60, and I know 2 times 6 is 12. And there is where her thinking is leading her to. Seonaid and I love this cognitively guided instruction approach. We see it working with children who love maths to begin with, but we're also seeing a huge enjoyment and improvement in engagement with children that think that maths is really hard and only for someone if you're really clever. The bigger picture for us is making children, successful learners, the confident individual, the responsible citizen, and the effective contributor. This nails it as far as I'm concerned on every single level, on every single classroom. It's joyful, it's meaningful, the children are actively engaged, they're repeating these, they're iterative, they're repeating these counting collections with different collections, or maybe their favorite, as Seonaid said, and it's really socially interactive. We hope you feel inspired to explore counting collections and enjoy the journey just as much as we are. This picture is a modern day picture. If you look really carefully, even though she's got the lovely counting collections here, you've got this lovely 2-meter distance that Seonaid and I always stay apart from each other. Well, we haven't been together for a long time, Seonaid. Basically, thanks and acknowledgements. You will be able to get hold of the presentation. These are all the schools that we have used all their fabulous work. And we also want to thank Dr. Leo Moscadini and the staff and pupils at a school that we visited in North Lanark as part of our project research. And that's us.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you. That was really interesting, really thought-provoking. There are a couple of questions in the chat. So Caris is asking, how often and for how long do you do this?
I think it would really depend on the age of the children or the stage that they're thinking. Initially, trying to get it up and running, I would get it started so that the whole class are having a go and practicing, because initially the hardest bit is stepping back and watching them really struggle with organising the materials, because we make that assumption that they will be able to count and group in a manner that's systematic, and that takes a little bit of time. Some children go through that really quickly, but others find it takes time. Younger children, obviously their collections are going to be smaller and it's not going to take them as long. But we're finding children are spending the whole maths lesson counting a collection and exploring lots and lots of deep thinking. And then sometimes wanting to extend that the next day. So again, it really depends on your children. So try it with them and adapt it to suit them.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of the classes we're doing this are now doing it as a regular weekly or twice a week thing. Online it's obviously a bit more difficult, but I probably wouldn't do it as a kind of session when I've got lots of other things going on in the classroom, because the whole joy of it is that sharing of ideas and everybody being engaged in the same activity, and it's a real leveler.
Yeah, and that opportunity to sort of switch partners and have people working in different groups, there's so many opportunities. I would definitely recommend investigating it, having a go and investigating and just digging deeper with it. Yeah, and a regular activity across the school would really support that transition as well. It's like going back to that favourite book, they're doing their favourite activity, but they're doing it in different classes in different ways.
Great, thank you. We have 1 minute left, so if anybody has any questions, quickly throw them into the chat. But apart from that, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. It really is great that you've given up your time to do this on a Saturday, and also thank you to all those who have attended this as well. We really do appreciate you giving up your time to do this, so thank you everybody. We'll keep monitoring.
I think counting's much more interesting than we assume sometimes, so hopefully we'll have inspired some people to give it a go.
And somebody has said in the chat that they found it inspiring, so that's good.
We're going to do it on Monday. Yay!
We have friends on the chat. I think that might be one of them.